This is episode number 27 of Mystery Meets Fine Dining Podcast. Welcome to New York City.
This is Mystery Meets Fine Dining Podcast, helping foodies discover new restaurants and new friends. Here's your host, the founder of Mystery Meat, Seth Ressler.
Hello and welcome to Mystery Meets Fine Dining Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Seth Ressler. This is the podcast for foodies who love travel and travelers who love food. Each week we go to a different city. We find a local food expert. Quite often it is a food blogger, and we talk to them about the culinary scene in their town. This week we are going to go fine dining in a city you may have heard of. It's called New York. Got a few restaurants over there, so I'm very excited. This is the first time we've been there. We are talking, and we have on the line Marissa Olson of the Le Foodité blog. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to find out about your blog. We're going to talk to you about the culinary scene in New York City. We're actually going to focus on Manhattan because it's a very big city. You've got a great restaurant recommendation for us, and then we're going to play a game called Out of the Frying Pan. And I want to let people know right up at the top here that we're going to mention lots of restaurants, lots of places to go. Don't feel like you got to take notes. I will put links to everything we talk about up on the website over at mysterymeat.org. So Marissa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your blog.
I started Le Foodité about 5 years ago, and I was actually living in Boston and wishing I was back in New York City. So I'm a native New York City girl, and after school I spent a brief stint in Boston.
Let's talk about this here because I spent a long time in Boston.
Okay.
And every once in a while I run into a New Yorker they act like they're exiled in Boston. Like, oh, I had to do time in Boston.
Oh, no, I hope I'm not stepping on your toes. No, Boston was a wonderful city, but for a born and bred New Yorker, I really craved the, that New York City, that pulse that New York City has. But I love Boston. It's great. I'm there all the time.
Can I interject with one? I didn't think Seinfeld was that funny.
Okay.
And I thought Cheers was a better sitcom, okay?
That's fine. I'm not going to argue.
All right. So you were in Boston. You started the blog.
And then I moved back to the city, and that's where, I think the blog picked up a little bit more. There was a little more stimuli. I put a little more effort in. And I really think of Le Foodité as a blog for people who love food.
All right, so we need to talk about New York City because we haven't been there yet, and so I'm very excited. And to be honest, I'm a little bit intimidated because it's so big and because it's so many restaurants. So I need you're going to have to hold my hand through this whole thing.
I'll talk you through it.
But before we get there, I know you've got a trivia question for me.
I do.
Shoot.
So New York City is known for, I think, one of the first things you think about is pizza. So my trivia question is, what is the name of New York City's first pizzeria? And then what year did it open?
What is the name? Geez. Because I was going to ask you, what year did it open? Can I have a hint? Can you give me the century?
The beginning of the 20th century.
Oh, okay. That's actually more recent than I would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
First pizzeria in New York. What is it? I have no idea. So I'm going to think about it. And after I think about it, I'm still probably going to have no idea, but we're going to come back to that.
That's okay.
So let's talk about New York City. I have never lived in New York City. I have worked there. I've commuted in and done some work there. And the first thing I think you notice about New York City is that it's just big.
Yeah.
Compared to a city like Boston, which is still a sizable city.
Right.
One of the things I noticed was that, Boston is for the most part 3 stories tall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Until you get downtown into the financial district, which, it's basically 3 stories tall. New York City is, I think, 1 million stories tall.
It is, I know. And every building that goes up is a little taller than the next.
Right. So that's the first thing you notice when you get into the city. Tell me where you start as a foodie in New York City. What does a foodie need to know to start with?
Well, I think, due to the diversity of New York City, there tends not to be just one neighborhood associated with specific cuisines other than, the famous Chinatown and Little Italy. So I just thought I could highlight 3 of my favorite areas that I go, which are chock full of restaurants.
Okay, and these are all in Manhattan?
These are all in Manhattan, yes.
All right, go. Yeah, sure.
So the first one is the West Village, which is just a charming area. It's really historic. There's lots of old brownstones and beautiful old parks. And I always associate the West Village with Italian food. So there are, some very quaint, charming Italian restaurants. And some of my favorite is Babbo by Mario Batali. It's delicious. And if you can get a reservation, they tend to book up very quickly. I have to recommend getting the pasta tasting with the wine tasting. It's phenomenal.
Let me ask, do you need a reservation for most places in New York City, or?
Well, actually, a lot of restaurants hold tables for walk-ins, which is really nice. And the other culture in New York City is eating at the bar, which I actually prefer to do.
Okay.
So while I do think reservations are recommended, you will be surprised by a number of restaurants that do allow and hold tables for walk-ins.
And when we say, you got to make a reservation, does that mean drop something into Open Table at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or does that mean we have to call 2 months in advance and, plan our vacation very, very carefully?
It does depend on the restaurant. So I know Babbo only takes reservations a month in advance. So what I've done is, put my reminder in my cell phone to call that morning, and then you just call compulsively until they pick up. And then they usually have a reservation at 5:30 or 11 o'clock.
It's like getting tickets to a U2 concert, right?
Exactly. But then other restaurants, I do use Open Table, but I have to say I have better luck when I actually call the restaurant.
Okay.
I find that there's more options when you actually call the reservation line as opposed to Open Table. But yeah, I'd say most restaurants are about a month ahead.
So the West Village, definitely a place to explore.
And then also Chinatown. It is really great. They have American style, but they also have authentic Szechuan. So there's always Grand Szechuan, which is delicious, and great dim sum like the Golden Unicorn or Red Egg. So one of, I think, the typical New York experiences is doing Sunday dim sum in Chinatown.
And for people who don't know, explain what dim sum is.
Sure. So it's a Chinese equivalent of their brunch, and basically, traditionally, you sit at a very large round table, and there's a little cart that comes around, and there's small pieces of things such as dumplings or spring rolls or even chicken feet or pork soup dumplings, so small, tiny bites. And you basically choose by pointing while the carts go around, and you fill your plate with all sorts of, delicious Chinese food. So it's really fun. It's good to share.
So I don't need to be intimidated if I don't speak Chinese then?
They should be able to help you through it.
And you mentioned a couple of dishes. I mean, what do you recommend people try when they're doing dim sum?
So I love roasted pork buns, one of my all-time favorites. I love the mini spare ribs. Sometimes they have scallion pancakes, pork soup dumplings, shrimp gyoza, and that's all I have for now. Those are my usual go-tos.
Now, and again, this goes back to my intimidation. Sometimes when we get into these ethnic enclaves and you can't read the signs and things like that, how do you know which of the restaurants in Chinatown are the good ones that you should try and which ones aren't? Like, how do you judge a restaurant in Chinatown?
So I actually use word of mouth. Some of my colleagues happen to be Chinese, and they've recommended some great restaurants. So I typically go word of mouth for the Chinese restaurant.
You're not Yelping it or anything like that?
Yelp is great. I love, Serious Eats, or I do trust the New York Times when they do a review.
Right. But
yeah, I think the word of mouth from my colleagues who are Chinese or friends who are Chinese, they seem to know the really good, authentic places to go.
While we're on the subject of the New York Times restaurant reviews,
yeah,
there was a restaurant review that was sort of felt around the world recently.
Mm-hmm. Guy Fieri's, is that what we're referring to?
Yes.
I guess right.
So tell me what you made of that. As a native New Yorker, how did you feel as you read that review?
Well, I was really mixed. I mean, to be honest, it was quite harsh. I have to say I have not had Guy Fieri's food, and I have not been to the restaurant, although that review did make my husband and me want to check it out. So in some ways, it worked to Guy's chagrin, I guess. I thought it was tough, but I laughed. It was tough as nails, but I had a chuckle. Mm-hmm.
As a native, when you see these big places that come into, especially like a Times Square, I mean, do you view them as tourist traps? Do you view them as a place that's actually worthy of checking out?
I actually do not eat in the Times Square area a lot, so I guess I am a little...
And why is that? Is it because it's expensive? Is it because it's touristy? Is it...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's a certain style that's associated with the Times Square area and the Broadway and the expensive shows and the big restaurants. So I think, as a native, I tend not to go to the Times Square area. I actually don't go to Broadway that much.
Right.
I know, shame on me, but it's expensive to go out to this Broadway these days. And however, I do have to say, I think the area is so important for tourism because so much of, what gives the New York City economy the boost is the tourism.
So I'm always fascinated by this. I'm always curious when I talk to, I'm always curious, do people who live in Vegas actually go to the Strip? Do, people in New Orleans
I don't know.
actually go to Bourbon Street? Or is it really just filled with little shops that sell keychains,
Right.
So not necessarily on your list. I mean, if you're going to see a Broadway show, fine. But you're saying the West Village, Chinatown, any other neighborhoods we should check out while we're there?
I love the Lower East Side, too. Historically, that's where a lot of immigrants set up their lives, their homes. So that's sort of like a hodgepodge of all sorts of types of food in the Lower East Side. So that's just a really fun area to check out. And there's lots of little tiny streets, and you'll get lost there. But you still have it has that historic feeling it had, I think, in the turn of the 20th century where, a lot of people came and inhabited that neighborhood. So it's just kind of fun to walk around and get lost. And
now, what about chefs? Because, obviously this is a place that just attracts a lot of big chefs, like a magnet. Who are the chefs that we should check out in their restaurants in New York City?
One of my favorites is, I don't know if you've heard of the Spotted Pig, with April Bloomfield as the head chef. And the Spotted Pig is a gastro-style pub. And she is really famous for, using all sorts of parts of the pig, let's say. You might have pig ears or pig feet. She has a great burger that's to die for, and she only serves it with blue cheese.
Ooh.
So you can't go in and ask for cheddar or Swiss. Like, she's just giving, or maybe it's Roquefort, but it's the burger you order, and that's all you're going to get. No extra sides. So she's really strict about that, but it's worth the wait. Another fun restaurant in the East Village is Momofuku by David Chang. And he's really known for kind of getting the ramen noodle soup very popular again, and also has great pork buns using pork belly. That's phenomenal.
Mm.
And then finally, I really like Sarah Jenkins. She's a chef who has a restaurant in the East Village called Porcena, and has a lot of Italian food in the, Sicilian style.
Uh-huh.
And, she's really getting big, so.
Some good recommendations, good things to try. And I have to imagine in New York City, there's always a food event going on.
Always.
But are there a few that you would highly recommend people check out?
Sure. So the first one that came to mind is the New York City Wine and Food Festival. And this is run by the Food Network. And it's usually in October, around mid-October. There's also the New York Wine Expo, who doesn't like wine? And that's actually coming up this March, the 1st to the 3rd, at the Jacob Javits Center. And then for people who maybe aren't as into the meats, I feel like I've been describing a lot of meats and heavy dishes, there's the New York City Vegetarian Food Festival. And that's actually this March 2nd and 3rd on West 18th.
Oh, wow.
So you could hit up a few festivals this early March, yeah.
Do you see a lot of restaurants responding to things, like vegetarianism, like people who need to go gluten-free? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm actually seeing that more and more. Even, a lot of pizza restaurants are saying, try our gluten-free pizza dough. So I think, the chefs have really become, or they're really responding to the different types of food needs that people are having. But then there's still the, old-fashioned chefs who aren't going to budge, and this is their specialty, and you're coming here to eat the beef or...
And it is what it is.
Exactly. Right.
And obviously this is the epicenter of a lot of trends. I mean, this is where food trends start. What are the food trends that you're seeing now?
So right now I'm seeing a lot of these hotspot Asian restaurants. There's one called Red Farm, which is fancy Chinese in the West Village. And there's also a place called Mission Chinese in the Lower East Side. And these are the kind of places where I see people waiting for 2 hours to get a seat.
Wow.
I haven't been to Mission Chinese. It's on my list. But again, it's one of those places I know I need to go at 4:30 and just wait it out.
What makes these Chinese places different than the average everyday Chinese place?
I think they're being a little more innovative than, your traditional Chinese, or they're really playing around with different kinds of peppers or spices. They're also in more trendy neighborhoods as well.
Okay.
So that tends to turn heads.
All right. I know you've got a great restaurant recommendation. We're going to get to that in a minute, and we're also going to play Out of the Frying Pan. Plus, we're going to find out where the first pizzeria was in the United States. That's coming up in just a second. As always, before we get to the restaurant recommendation, I want to take a minute to clue you into a few things about Mystery Meat. First off, I'm working on a project. And if we pull it together, it'll be the biggest thing that Mystery Meat has ever done. But I can't tell you what it is yet. I'll only tell you, we'll give it a code name. We'll call it Taste Trek. That's all I'm going to say for now. I indicated in the last podcast, I guess, that it was also involved the city of Providence, Rhode Island, which Travel and Leisure magazine recently named the #1 culinary tourism destination in the country. But that's it. I'm not telling you anything else right now. You gotta wait. However, I will tell you this. I'll tell you what Mystery Meat is. Mystery Meat is this social dining group. We started it in Boston back in 2010. It is now spread to other cities, including San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose. We're going to launch in St. Louis come April, and we're bringing it to other cities as well. Here's how it works. It's a bunch of foodies who get together to enjoy a great meal at a restaurant, but there's a catch. They don't know where they're going until 24 hours in advance. So when you buy your ticket, you don't know who you're going to be eating with, and you don't know where you're going to be having that meal, but you know when you do, it's a good time. Because it's nothing but adventurous foodies who show up, and inevitably the conversation revolves around who's eaten where, and have you been here, and oh, this is great, and have you ever made this? It's fantastic. If you are a foodie, we'd love to have you. You can be single, you can come as a couple, you can be older, you can be younger, doesn't matter. As long as you love food, you're in. All you have to do is go to mysterymeat, MEET.org, and click the big orange button that says Get an Invitation, Sign Up. We will send you an invitation if we've already got them going on in your city, and if not, tell your friends, and when they sign up, we see a bunch of interest. We will start Mystery Meat dinners in your town. That's exactly what's happening with St. Louis. That's why we started it there. So, head over to the website, mysterymeat, MEET.org, click the orange button, and get an invitation. We are talking to Marissa Olson of Les Foodités out of New York. I feel like there's no way to say something in French without sounding snooty about it.
You do. You're doing really well. You're doing well.
I don't know if that's my bias or what. And we're talking about the culinary scene in New York City. Now, you had a trivia question for me. What was it?
What was the first New York City pizzeria? Tough one. I know.
And is this a famous name? Is this a name I might have heard of?
It is very famous. There's usually long lines. It's definitely a place where people go when they come to New York City. Can I give you a hint? It's downtown.
Sal's, Luigi's, Mario's. I don't know. What is it?
It's called Lombardi's Pizza, and it's at 32 Spring Street. And it was opened in 1905, and it has a coal-burning stove. It's pretty delicious.
Nice. So you've been there, so the pizza's good there.
The pizza is good. Best pizza, maybe, but it's definitely a fun experience to go, and the restaurant has a very labyrinth-like feel. It's old and historic, and you're right near Little Italy and Soho and Nolita, so it's a good place to have a lunch.
Lombardi's, good to know. Let's talk about your restaurant recommendation. You had the entire city of New York. What did you pick?
So I actually went with one of my favorite restaurants I go to. I'm there probably once a week, and it's called the Mermaid Inn. So it has a special place in my heart.
So tell me about the Mermaid Inn. I mean, let's start with who are the chefs behind it?
The original restaurant started in the East Village, and it opened in 2003 by restaurateur partners Jimmy Bradley and Danny Abrams. And it originally opened up as a 75-seat seafood restaurant. And this famous duo were behind the Red Cat in Chelsea and also the Tribeca restaurant, the Harrison. And the Mermaid Inn is a Mediterranean-inspired seafood restaurant with reasonable prices. So that's, check mark for me.
Nice.
They really believe in top-notch food coupled with, friendly and reliable service.
I went on their website, and they actually have a school of fish where they tell you about all the different fish, and they've got an Oysterpedia where you can actually go through and learn about the different types of oyster. Exactly.
And what I also like is they're really big on, sustainable seafood. So there's certain types of fish they won't serve in their restaurant because of, extinction reasons or other reasons like that.
So I walk in to the restaurant and tell me what the vibe is.
So to me, the vibe is like being transported to New England.
Oh, I see how it is. You want a New England restaurant. You just don't want to actually have to be in New England.
I told you I love New England in the beginning, but just that, Boston might not be where I settle it down.
I understand.
But I do love New England, for the record. So the vibe is, like I said, very New England. White walls, votive candles and candlelight, sea-inspired artwork. There's a portrait of JFK and Jackie staring at you when you're sitting at the bar. Cozy. Very cozy.
So I sit down, I'm looking at the menu, and where do I begin?
So you have to start with the oysters. If you're an oyster person, that's where you start. They have East Coast and West Coast, and they change daily. I tend to order East Coast the Naked Cowboys, not only because they're fun to say, but because they actually taste like the New England Sea.
Can you taste the difference between East Coast and West Coast?
It took me a few years, I have to be honest. I just kind of slurped them down, and I originally put a lot of cocktail sauce on them, and they were basically just eating like cocktail sauce in your mouth. But once you really, start trying different types, and I tend to use just a little mignonette sauce that they serve with a splash of lemon, I find that the East Coast tend to be more saltier or brinier and have like a real ocean feel, whereas the West Coast might taste more like cucumbers or watermelons, like maybe more fruity. That's what I've noticed.
What makes a good oyster? I mean, what are you looking for in an oyster?
Well, first of all, very fresh, cold, and I know some people say they just shoot them back. I like to chew my oysters. There's a whole school of thought about how you eat an oyster, but I'm really looking for that big taste that you eat. Like you can tasting the seawater. That's what I'm looking for, plus the flavor. And, oysters go great with Prosecco or champagne, too, which is always a nice way to start your meal.
Other appetizers you recommend?
Sure. One of my favorites is something that Mermaid does. It's called lobster knuckles escargot. So this is kind of what I mean by the dish comes in a traditional escargot dish, but it actually has little nuggets of lobster meat, and it's covered in a parsley garlic butter. And then they serve a nice piece of grilled bread that you could just really sop up all the delicious juice.
Oh, that sounds good.
So that's one of my favorites. It's really good.
Nice.
And I also love the tuna crudo, which has huge chunks of yellowfin tuna, and it's mixed with jalapenos, avocado, lime, and sea salt. And it's a really generous portion if you're looking for some tuna, and I love the way the lime kind of brings out this really vibrant flavor.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. That sounds really good.
It's delicious.
Oh.
Can I mention one other appetizer I really like?
Sure.
I told you, I can really talk about the restaurant.
Right. You've been there more than once, I take it.
Right. One of my other favorites is the seared calamari, which is a totally different take on your traditional calamari. I always love when I see people ordering it for the first time because they always expect, even though it says seared, I think you always expect, the fried pieces of kind of gummy
right.
calamari dipped in your marinara. But this is actually a full salad, and it's perfectly seared calamari with a little lemon vinaigrette. And then it's chopped full of shiitake and cremini mushrooms, feta, and frisee lettuce. So it's kind of really unexpected. And there's some really nice umami flavors of the mushrooms, and I just love the lightness of the dish. And, who would have thought to put feta in calamari?
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a big calamari fan, having spent a lot of time up in New England, and
right.
So often it's the Rhode Island style calamari with the peppers. This sounds really good.
Which I love, too.
All right, let's move to main dishes. What do you recommend?
Well, you can't go wrong with any of the fish of the day. So it's locally caught, and it changes every day. And they will usually do a whole fish grilled, just with extra virgin olive oil, lemon, and sea salt. So you can't go wrong with that. And one of my other favorites is the spaghetti fra diavolo, which is a huge portion of spaghetti topped with this delicious, spicy fra diavolo sauce, which is a marinara with lots of seafood in it. So mussels and shrimp and squid. And then they throw a huge topping of fresh arugula. So you kind of have the greens mixed in with the red sauce and seafood and pasta, and that's a really nice dish.
That sounds interesting. Sounds like a little bit of everything.
It is. And then they're also famous for their lobster sandwich, which is full of lobster meat that's lightly dressed in mayonnaise, and it's served on a buttery brioche roll with the spicy Old Bay fries.
That's it right there. I'm in for that. I'm mentally checking off what I'm going to have when I go there.
Please, yeah.
In terms of beverages, what are we pairing this with?
So they have a few beers on tap. Mostly it's a 6-point Sweet Action or Blue Point Toasted Lager or their Mermaid Pilsner. And the beers are about $7 or $8 a glass. They also have delicious cocktails. My favorite is the Chili Margaret, which is a take on a spicy margarita. And that's served with Milagros tequila, Cointreau, fresh lime, and a jalapeno sugar.
Ooh.
So that's actually one of my favorite cocktails to start.
That sounds like it's got a kick to it.
Yeah, it does. Definitely. It's a nice way to, pair maybe with some oysters, or if you're going to get the lobster escargot, it's kind of fun.
Nice.
And then in terms of wine, they have, a mix of French, Italian, German, New York, California, and South American wines. And the price point is about $30 to $50 a bottle.
And then dessert. Anything you recommend?
So one of the little snippets or trinkets to Mermaid is they only have one dessert, and it's a complimentary cup of chocolate pudding, and that's their dessert.
Is it good?
It is really good. It comes in a little espresso cup with whipped cream on top.
Nice.
Another fun thing that the restaurant does is they give you little fortune teller fish, and that's all I'm going to say, because you have to go and see what that's all about.
Can you tell us what your fortune was?
In love.
All right. Was that true? Was that accurate?
I hope so, because I just got married this fall. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I did get married in New England.
Oh, you did? And was that the person you were in love with?
Yes, I
Okay,
hope so.
good. I hear it works best when you do it that way.
Right.
All right, how much are we dropping on this meal here? What's this going to set us back?
It's about $50 to $60 a person, depending on, if you order oysters, an appetizer, and an entree, and a glass or two of wine.
That is the Mermaid Inn. Thank you for the recommendation. Are you ready to play a game?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, this game is called Out of the Frying Pan. Here's how it works. I am going to ask you for a series of rapid-fire recommendations. Just tell me the first thing that pops into your head. All right, you ready?
Okay.
I have to imagine that there's a lot of food trucks there in the city of New York.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite food truck?
I do, and it's called Taim. It's Taim. Basically an Israeli falafel truck, and they have amazing falafel sandwiches.
Obviously, you've got some of the best bartenders in the world there in New York City. When you want to go to a place for an original cocktail, where do you go?
I actually go to Ouest, which is a Tom Valenti restaurant. It's a French restaurant on the Upper West Side, and they just make mean cocktails.
Let's say I'm coming into New York City for a romantic weekend getaway. Is there a romantic restaurant that you can recommend?
I would have to say Babbo, which I know I've mentioned before, but I think what is more romantic than delicious pasta, an amazing wine list, and also you're in the West Village. It's one of my go-to restaurants as well.
I've actually heard that in New York City, a lot of the produce is fresher and healthier than it is sometimes in other more suburban or rural places. Where is your favorite place to go buy fruits and vegetables?
I love the Union Square Market, probably one of the most famous markets in New York City. And I also go to a neighborhood one on the Upper West Side on Sundays, which sets up right in front of the Natural History Museum.
What about the restaurant with the best view?
Ooh. One restaurant I really love is called Landmark, and that's actually in the Time Warner Center, and you get to overlook Central Park.
Best place to eat on a budget?
Street food. New York City is known for its street food, so I would say one of the vending carts in all the neighborhoods they're set up.
So Seinfeld had one episode that was kind of funny, and it involved the soup Nazi.
Okay.
Where do you go to get soup?
I actually just had delicious matzo ball soup at Veselka in the East Village. It was one of the best matzo ball soups I've ever had. So I would have to say Veselka.
Let's say I do find myself in the Times Square neighborhood. Is there a restaurant that you would recommend while I'm there?
I like John's Pizzeria. That's where I go if I'm going to see a show. John's.
Last question.
Yes.
True or false? Yankees suck.
I'm not a sports fan, so I don't get to answer that. I actually grew up as a Mets fan, so I can go Mets.
All right. The restaurant recommendation is the Mermaid Inn. It is located at 568 Amsterdam Avenue in Manhattan. You can find them online at themermaidnyc.com. They've got a couple of other locations as well, so you might want to check out any of the locations that they've got. And what about you, Marissa? If people want to find you online or on social media, how can they do that?
Well, it's lesfoodites.net, so it's LESFOODITES.net. I'm also at Twitter at lesfoodiete.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. I feel much less intimidated by the city now. Now I have a list of places I can go to, so I appreciate that.
Please let me know next time you're in town, because we'll check out Mermaid Inn and a few other favorite spots.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been Mystery Meats Fine Dining Podcast. My name is Seth Ressler. A couple of show notes before we go. First of all, if you want to get that Mystery Meat invite, head over to the website, mysterymeat.org. Click the big orange button that says Get an Invitation. While you're there, you can find links to many of the things that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can follow us on Twitter. We are mystery_meat. You can also find links to us on Facebook or a bunch of other social networks. And you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes. That helps us out quite a bit. And while you're there, do us a favor, leave a review. And finally, if you are a foodie or a culinary expert or involved in a culinary event, please, by all means, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Head over to mysterymeat.org and click the Contact Us link and shoot us an email, and we will have you on. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next time.
This has been Mystery Meats Fine Dining Podcast. You can find links to the websites mentioned in this episode at mysterymeat.org/podcast. Thank you for listening.